All right, as this article out of CNBC News says, and we will elaborate on it, I promise, it says Pentagon will send 1,500 troops along with drones and fighter jets to the Middle East to counter Iran threat. This non-existing threat that does not exist at all, completely falsified BS that goes back over 100 years, and we're going to get into that a lot in this video. But of course, we are joined by Erin Nakamoto, and we are going to do whatever we can to break down this issue that is extensive, to say the least, because it involves over 100 years of militarism by the military-industrial complex in trying to destroy countries around the world, control them, take over them, take their oil, take their sovereignty, quote-unquote, and, of course, be able to install their puppets. And it has to do with banking as well and the monetary system. Let's get into this.
Speaking of which, have you read the Economic Hitman?
Economic Hitman. John from World Alternative Media here was nice enough when I was driving to across or throughout the United States last year.
Did he read it aloud?
To tell me everything that he read in it. So
it's my favorite. It's my favorite book.
All right. Well, and yeah, like again, this is an issue that it's far greater than a politician, but who's controlling the politician and where the money is running. But let's get into this article, which says the Pentagon will send additional American troops, drones, and fighter jets to the Middle East amid increasing tensions between the United States and Iran. And I quote, "The deployment will include approximately 1,500 U.S. military personnel and consist of a Patriot battalion to defend against missile threats, additional intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, an engineer element to provide force protection improvement throughout the region, and a fighter aircraft squadron to provide additional deterrence and depth to our aviation response options," Acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan wrote in a statement Friday. Defense officials at the Pentagon said Friday that they had credible intelligence that Iran and its proxies are planning to attack U.S. forces in the Middle East. Always funny to hear the United States government talking about proxies. Anyway, carrying on, and I quote, "We have had multiple credible reports that Iranian proxy groups intend to attack U.S. personnel in the Middle East. While we won't be able to declassify all the available intelligence, we believe that Iran's actions and threats are troubling, escalatory, and dangerous to our U.S. forces and those of our regional partners," said Vice ADM Michael Gilday, director of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Gilday added that a series of recent attacks in the region have been inspired by Iran, including a rocket attack in Iraq, armed drone attacks on Saudi oil pumping stations, and the sabotage of 4 vessels, including the 2 Saudi oil tankers. And I quote, "We believe with a high degree of confidence that the recent attacks stems back to the leadership in Iran at the highest levels," Gilday said of the attacks. I wonder what happens, Erin, when we go to different places, build a wall around their border of troops pointing guns at them, install coups for 100 years in their country.
And then not expect them to fight back?
Yeah, arm the Iraqis, by the way, in the 60s and into the 80s as well, to fight against Iran and overtake Iran, just like they funded, Osama bin Laden to go against the Soviets. And then use that same reason to go into Iraq later on for weapons of mass destruction that they said that they basically gave to them in the first place. They are creating order out of chaos. This is just a perfect example of the military-industrial complex. We're going to go into another article in a moment. But, I mean, what do you think about this vast militarism that we're seeing throughout the world? It just never ends.
It never ends. It is so freaking constant. And, what would we do if these people surrounded us in our country and put up hundreds of bases surrounding our country and our military?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well, people won't think of
that.
People won't think of that because they're in a bubble, right? They're in a bubble where it's like, we cannot imagine someone doing the same thing to us, but we're America, we're big and tough and we're strong and we control the world.
Right.
It's like Team America World Police, basically.
It's so frustrating.
And we can't forget 1952-53, the military coup in Iran where the United States reinstalled the Shah. and caused a vast panic in Iran after they, quote unquote, democratically, whatever you want to call it, elected their own government and overthrew the Shah. And the Shah wasn't too happy about being overthrown when he was reinstalled, let me add, and there was a lot of people were affected. And we can go all the way through the 60s into 1979, and there was the crisis, and
basically the government creates the problem and then puts it all over mainstream media, pegging it on someone else, and then America comes in and saves us all.
Yeah.
You know, it's total something I want to say,
you can't
but
say
I
on
can't.
Wham. See, this is again another example of it doesn't matter who the president is. There will always be this militarism. We've been hearing about Iran forever, and has Iran ever attacked the United States? Would they? I mean, this is the same argument as Syria. This notion that Assad would bomb the United States. It would just be the end of him, and it's already Craterville in Syria. Like, why would? It's so ridiculous, and that goes to that the fake chemical bombing attack in Syria. Sure, there was an attack; it killed a lot of people, but the idea
it was
that
sad. It was sad.
It was terrible, but the idea that the Syrian government did it is so ridiculous. It's like I remember Tillerson at the time was saying we have no plan to go after Assad anymore, and like 3 days later, there was this chemical attack where Assad essentially shot himself in the foot and decided to bomb people for no reason and let cameras in there to take pictures of all the dead babies and then post that to American news. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And then about a year later, again, the United States, almost to the day, says, yeah, we have no plan to go after Assad anymore. Again, 2 or 3 days later, to the date, there's another chemical attack, and Assad, for no reason, bombs his own civilians. It is so ridiculous. If you want to see evidence of governments bombing their own civilians, look no further than the United States. But anyway, that's a whole other situation entirely. But the point is, they've done this with Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, North Korea. They're doing this with Iran. They've been doing it for a long time. We can't forget their partnerships with places like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Israel, Britain, Canada, it goes on and on. This is a military-industrial complex. And if you want to talk about big government, what's bigger than gigantic world government of militarism? That's literally as big as you can get for government. What do you think, Erin? Do you think we will be seeing this actually play out? Because we've heard a lot about possibly attacking Iran for years.
I mean, look what we did in Libya. You know, like it's just I do see a war happening with Iran. I mean, how many years has it been that we have been in a constant state of war? You know, wasn't it like 7 years that the United States as a whole has been
since
at peace?
Inception, and it's ridiculous. Yeah, and at the same time, I also have to mention, like, we've seen this notion of non-interventionism forever among all these presidential candidates. Clinton ran on non-interventionism. Bush ran on non-interventionism and
Trump
going against the Fed. Obama runs on non-interventionism, drops more bombs than any other president. And then Trump runs on non-interventionism, and he's trying to break Obama's record of dropping the most bombs. And what does this tell us?
I think he's already beaten it, right? He's beaten the record.
At this point in his presidency, absolutely.
It's so crazy.
And what does this tell us about voters overall? Well, first of all, that they keep perpetuating this nonsense Pepsi and Coke attitude, but at the same time...
And yet voters, they call for a change,
yeah,
right? Like,
and
I want
don't
change,
want
but...
interventionism.
Exactly. And
they don't want war.
It's and people are very, very quick to jump to causes that they care about, but they totally ignore the fact that we kill so many people overseas. So many people for no reason. I mean, they aren't attacking us.
Hundreds of millions of people have died, and we're supposed to be fighting terrorism? Who are the terrorists when you kill hundreds of millions of people, the vast majority of them being innocent civilians? Collateral damage should kill a few thousand so-called terrorists that you armed and funded in the first place.
Yep, and you won't find the numbers anywhere.
Yeah.
And we'll never know for sure how many people the United States have actually murdered.
Because they go to a lot of countries that aren't completely controlled by government and bomb them because, so all these people aren't on record, they don't have licenses, and they're not in some system.
That and the mainstream media just constantly lies to us.
Yeah. Amber Lyon from CNN years ago came out and exposed CNN. She was on CNN. She was one of their top reporters. and she exposed how the U.S. government and CNN was working with the Bahrain government to cover up a massacre over there. I mean, it's one thing after another. And we have to mention also that Iraq has even mentioned in recent days that they don't want to comply with this militarism with Iran. They want nothing to do with it because Iraq, of course, is becoming very Kurdish. I'm planning to go there as well. The northern part of Iraq, they don't want any more conflict in the region. They're finally starting to portion off areas of Iraq where there isn't militarism. They're not getting bombed. There's no terrorism, etc. It's called Iraqi Kurdistan, and places like Erbil, which are completely peaceful. And I've seen guys in recent days actually hitchhiking through Iraq, through that part of Iraq, which is what made me want to go. I never thought I'd say that. But
he's trying to get us to go with him.
Come on, come to Iraq with me. I'm sure your parents would love that. Yeah, I mean,
I'm sending your DM.
Yeah. But I'm going to get into this other article quickly because I think it draws us nearer to the real conclusion, the real cui bono kind of situation here. As this article out of the National Interest says, the Pentagon is using the same old Vietnam playbook for dealing with Iran. And I would actually add Iraq as well. But anyway, as the article goes into, sometimes a moment is so ironic that it makes you stop for a minute to wonder who is running this universe. A classic example from the annals of U.S. military history. The first atomic bomb dropped on Japan was named Little Boy, and B-29 that carried it was named for the pilot's mother. A far less historic but equally strange event took place on Thursday when Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan acknowledged that the Pentagon is considering a request from the head of U.S. Central Command, Marine General Kenneth McKenzie Jr., to deploy more U.S. troops to the Middle East in response to purported threats from Iran, because, that's totally happening. I'm sure Iran could totally hit mainland Iran. Maybe they might hit the troops that are pointing guns at them literally there when they're shooting it. Anyway, well...
Yeah, it's not like they don't have already five bases surrounding.
Yeah, a million. And I quote, "What we're looking at is, are there things we can do to enhance force protection in the Middle East?" Shanahan told reporters at the Pentagon. It may involve sending additional troops, and some have even said that they wanted to see as many as 120,000 troops. These people are scumbags. Imagine how many children will die if 120,000 troops go there. I mean, a vast portion of these populations are under the age of 16. And we've seen that in Iraq. We saw that in Libya. It's so sickening. And as it says, that may not sound ironic at all until you realize that Shanahan was about to have a meeting with an official from Vietnam, home of the conflict that proved big things have small beginnings. The ghost of the Vietnam War has hovered above Washington, D.C. since May 5th, when White House National Security Advisor Ambassador John Bolton first announced an aircraft carrier strike group and bombers were headed to the Middle East, and I quote, "to send a clear and unmistakable message to the Iranian regime that any attacks on the United States interests or on those of our allies will be met with unrelenting force." Yeah, exactly. In response, Marine veteran Representative Seth Moulton, a Democrat from Massachusetts, recently told Task and Purpose he was concerned about a Gulf of Tonkin-like incident. Well, there you go.
Which was proven to be
a false flag.
Like
incident between U.S. and Iranian forces that could lead to outright war. And while your humble Pentagon correspondent was considering asking Shanahan if he, too, was concerned about a sequel to the Gulf of Tonkin, until he noticed the flag of the unified communist Vietnam fluttering in the breeze. Subtext had clearly become text, like when Doogie Howser wore an SS uniform at the end of Starship Troopers. That was a strange little point in this article, but okay then. Anyway, as it continues, for all those beloved leaders who were born after the 1980s and did not have the benefit of learning about Vietnam from popular culture, such as the short-lived cartoon show Rambo, The Force of Freedom, what is with these references? Let me sum up why this discussion is relevant to current events in Iran. The Vietnam War was a result of a series of strategic failures that the United States repeated in Iraq and Afghanistan, and looks bound to repeat with regards to Iran. While it's not an exact parallel, the United States military buildup in Vietnam began in earnest following 2 reported attacks, although one was probably imagined, against U.S. warships in the Gulf of Tonkin in August 1964. That year, there were roughly 20,000 U.S. troops in South Vietnam. 4 years later, more than 500,000 GIs were in the country. And let me just add that not only was the toll on the soldiers pretty bad, I mean, a whole bunch of people had PTSD, vast suicide rates skyrocketing, and they were not welcomed back very happily by people. At the same time, I have to mention, Gulf of Tonkin isn't the only example of the false flag leading into Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, who basically led the revolution for the communist nationalists in Vietnam, was armed and funded by FDR all those years earlier in the 1930s into the 40s. And of course, it was a French colony. It was overrun by French, and it just started with a few attacks. A few guys died. A few people were killed while Ho Chi Minh was in Washington, and it led to this vast unrolling of, making out Vietnam to be the bad guys right after Ho Chi Minh got all these arms and was basically praised as the guy who they want to be in charge in Vietnam and take over the north of Vietnam. And it became a horrible, horrible thing. So many people died. People were burned to death. People were given chemical bombs. We can't forget Agent Orange and Monsanto. And this just led to this massive war. And we could say the same thing for Pearl Harbor. They allowed it to happen just so that they had reason to go into Japan. And these things keep happening. 9/11, Iraq, the financial crisis, Libya, and all these false flags in the Arab Spring, which was pushed by the United Nations and outside Western forces. What do you think, Erin? I mean,
it's war is so unspeakable that I've said everything I can on the matter. It really is disgusting, and we need to end the cycle somehow.
People look at it from outside, from far away, with rose-colored lenses, and look at it as like this outside issue where some people are going somewhere to save us from something, and meanwhile they don't see what's actually happening on the ground. And if you see all the children getting blown up, how could you possibly support it? It's like I mentioned earlier with Syria. Like, oh, there's a chemical attack, which, by the way, the United States is involved in more chemical attacks than I think any other country in history. Yeah. But then they're like, in order to stop these chemical attacks, we need to kill 500 times the amount of people that died in this attack by dropping bombs on children to stop Syria from attacking their own people.
I don't think there's any topic that gets me more fired up than this. Because at what point are we going to say, stop going to war for no reason? I mean, stop killing children across the world. Stop, just get out and let people fight their own battles. I understand war is it's gonna happen, but for us to be involved in every conflict, it's ridiculous. Like, come home.
Billions, trillions of dollars stolen from taxpayers to go blow up children and pay off the interest on the debt, which all plays together because the monetary system is heavily a major issue for a lot of these wars. It both benefit from each other. The Federal Reserve and the bombing of countries, they both benefit from each other. The military-industrial complex needs an economic crisis. The economic crisis needs a war to prevail. We saw that after World War II and the massive financial crisis, and it was followed by World War II. And then we also saw the Korean War followed an economic crisis. The Vietnam War followed an economic crisis. Yeah. We could go into the Gulf War. It just continues. Iraq War followed the 2001 crisis. Libya and Yemen followed the 2008 crisis, and we're heading into another economic crisis. So I guess we need another war. And it's just the perpetual nature of massacring millions of innocent people for peace.
Speaking of that, did you see I think it was a tweet that the U.S. Army posted on Memorial Day weekend? Yeah. And it just got massive exposure of people saying, well, my uncle's dead because he got PTSD and put a gun in his mouth. And
wasn't it like, this Memorial Day, tell us why you're proud that he served?
Yeah, exactly. And just almost every single comment was just the after effects of war with PTSD and suicides and just massive drinking and just every bad thing that can come from war basically exposed in a tweet. And and what was their response? I mean, there were hundreds of negative comments, and how did the army respond?
Yeah. Exactly, and it's exactly that too, because you actually look at, especially with a voting record. I remember when Ron Paul was running, he had more support from veterans
Yeah.
than all of the presidential candidates in the GOP and Obama combined in 2012. So what does that tell you about where a lot of their hearts are? I mean, every veteran I meet is either damaged, disgusted, or robotic. And the robotic ones are the ones that are like, yeah, we must go back, we must continue these wars. They're the ones that have had all emotions knocked out of them by their training.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
They totally make them robots.
And it's a defense mechanism too, because a lot of them don't want to face the reality of what they saw and what they did in a lot of cases. And I mean, it's absolutely horrible. And again, as long as we perpetuate this issue, we will see millions die. It'll go on forever. It's just like democracy.
It comes down to, again, survival. I mean, that's why a lot of people join the military, is so they can get a paycheck and survive.
Yeah.
So once everyone should just buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, but
don't join the military.
It's problem, reaction, solution, repeat for eternity. The Hegelian dialectic. You blow up people's parents and children, and then they get angry, and then you take up arms that you probably arm them with and fund them with.
Yeah.
Just like, the immigration issue, they arm and fund the Mexican cartels and the Colombian cartels, etc., run guns to them, and have a war on drugs and create a problem that leads to conflict and violence, and not the kind of black market I like. And then at the same time as that, you have that with the military-industrial complex. You bomb these people, their families take up arms, you arm and fund them, you create a problem, you have more of a reason to go in, so you go in, bomb more people, arm more people, bomb more people, arm more people,
it's a
spread
perpetual
fear,
cycle.
and it goes on forever, and it pumps up these massive military entities, contractors, etc., and it'll just never end as long as we perpetuate it. So think for yourself, rule yourself, decentralize, break free from this paradigm, don't obey, and stop falling for it. And I do see optimism, because I see more people than ever questioning these narratives, questioning the false flags, and so many of them fall through. How much do you see today about the chemical attacks in Syria? Because people saw through it. It was obvious that, obviously Assad didn't do that. Yeah, it was ridiculous. So anyway.
So there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
There's always light as long as you look for the light. So anyway.
That was very nice.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Anyway, we'll be back at you with much more. This is Josh Sigurdson with Erin Nakamoto signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth. Be the change.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.
Thank you.